Welcome everyone. Nice to have you guys here. So welcome to the AIxDesign Community, our first event of September or second event of September, or our first event with the workshop this month. And also it's been a while since we've done a workshop actually, so we're really excited to see where this goes. And yeah, just briefly before I introduce you guys to Chris and the topic for today, for those of you that have happened to stumble on AIxDesign for the first time, you can check out our website at AIxDesign.co. Nadia will put it in the chat, and you can check out what we do on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and stay updated there. We also have a newsletter that you can sign up to stay updated on events and various resources within this field of AI and design. And yeah, looking forward to seeing more of you in the future as well. And for our topic for today on communal computing, we have Chris who will be introducing us to the topic and leading us through a workshop as well. I've seen a bit of the mural board, seems really exciting, very interactive. And yeah, with communal computing, especially nowadays, coming from personalized technology, how do we manage to allow for various people to use technology together? So that's a really interesting topic to question. How do we design for communal computing? So yes, Chris will talk and discuss more about this. For the first 20 minutes, Chris will be giving a talk and followed by a workshop, and then we'll have some Q&A time. So let's have some fun together, and I'll give the floor to Chris.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for being here. I'm really excited to try out this workshop. And yeah, so just a few kind of like housekeeping things. I will be sharing these slides afterwards. So if people want any of the references in them, we're gonna be doing that. And then we'll be, of course, posting the video. This is my personal email address and then my Twitter handle, in case you want to say nice things about me on the internet. You're more than welcome to. So communal computing is something that I've been kind of hitting up against, but didn't really have the language for it for a very long time. And so I've built, Amazon Alexa skills. I worked for a design consultancy called Philosophy, where we were doing a lot of different types of work, but we would also do things like IoT or smart home or things that were like shared interfaces in the office. I worked for a company called IPsoft, where we did a lot of work around conversational agents. And then most recently, I was at Facebook Reality Labs working on the Portal device, which is a home assistant. And so my role there was focused on identity, biometric recognition, and voice assistant integration. And so I think kind of all those different experiences started stacking up on each other and really compelled me to start writing about this. And then, this is really the first big talk and workshop that I'm giving around it. So I'm really excited to talk to all of you about this. And, it's a small, it's not a outrageously large group. So please feel free to jump in if you have a question or anything like that. I'm more than happy to answer questions while we go through this. If you need clarification, please let me know. So the first thing that we're going to talk about when we talk about the agenda, I'm going to give you an overview of what communal computing is, and I'll talk really briefly about some examples of problems that come up for them in general. I'm going to talk a little bit about empathy mapping for the machine, but really how that ended up leading me to something called animistic design. And then we'll spend a bulk of our time in the workshop actually doing something that I guess we're going to call animistic mapping is what we're going to call it. But it's basically a workshop to help understand these devices better in a context that is more around animistic design. And then we'll just have a quick closing and some Q&A. So what is communal computing, right? Communal devices are things that are in your home or office, and that could include things like the Amazon Echo, which was, I think, really the first one that was very connected. There's always been kind of connected services, but this is the more general purpose device that started getting into your home. There's things like the Google Home Hub, the Facebook Portal, things like that, which are devices with screens, video cameras, being able to do more functionality even than just like audio only devices like the Echo. But I'd include aspects like smart light bulbs, this idea of smart sockets, even the Apple TV, to a certain extent, when you talk about communal or shared devices that multiple people will use either over the course of a day or at the same time, TVs are definitely one of those. And then I think you could even go further back and start talking about this idea of the landline phone that was in everybody's kitchen, probably when everybody was growing up here. But again, I always also feel like maybe I'm starting to become like an anachronism. But the idea of like, you would call this phone number and some random person in this household would pick up the phone and then help route you to the right person, right? That was like the first communal device that was connected to other people. But there's always been things that have, like, everybody's used, like bookcases are a great example of where people that live in the space all utilize the bookcase in some way. So I think this is something that is part of a human pattern of usage, but has become weirder and weirder as we've started to connect devices to the rest of the internet and to other people. So, what I'd love to just talk about here really quickly is I'd love to ask everybody here, what are some devices that people here own that maybe I didn't talk about, but they would consider connected and part of this kind of definition around communal devices? I'd love to hear anybody can think of anything else. Anybody? Feel free to just shout it out.
I have a Google Home.
Okay, Google Home, cool.
I actually think about my Sonos speaker.
Okay, yeah, Sonos. They were very old school, like one of the original shared speakers that is connected. Absolutely. Anybody else?
Also, I'm not sure where we draw the line on device, but like we share a washing machine and stuff, and then sometimes other people leave stuff in there, and then when I want to wash their stuff, is still in there.
Yeah. No, and washer dryers are a great example of that, right? Like, I would also say that it doesn't just have to be connected devices, right? Like, there's lots of things that we use that are kind of communal devices. I mean, another one I'd like to bring up now that you brought up washers and dryers is like refrigerators, right? Refrigerators are usually a shared device. There are controls on them. There are also now like newer versions that are connected and have more digital kind of things. But the idea of like putting a sticky note on a refrigerator for someone else basically is a way for us to communicate through time and space when it comes to like a communal device. So yeah, any other thoughts about this?
Not a device per se, but like when I think of like communal stuff, I think of like communal subscriptions like Netflix and Spotify.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're going to talk about Spotify a few times during this presentation as well. I don't mean to beat them up about this, but I think they're a great example of kind of like where this goes wrong. So I will be referencing them a whole bunch. And then Netflix is another great one, right? Like they think about this type of stuff when they started adding profiles to the way that they allow for access to recommendations and things. So I think there's something really, absolutely, shared services are another great example of this. And actually this gets even weirder because your commune in this case ends up being everybody that you gave your username and password to. All right, so it's not just the idea of like people inside of your household. It could be people that are like part of a social group that you're part of that's online in some way. So great. Well, thank you everybody for that. These are all great examples. So there's a bunch of problems though. And so I want to start with an example around Sonos, around Spotify. And so what you can see here is this is an example of the recommendation set. This is probably like a couple months ago for me. And so you can see that there's a bunch of different types of music that I'm listening to. But what's interesting is that one of these playlists is actually not a playlist for me. And so this one down here, my kids listen to a lot of kind of kids music, musicals. Frozen music has been like really popular in our household. And so this particular mix is not one, I mean, I have listened to Les Mis, by the way. I have listened to Les Mis before, so I will claim that. But the fact that it became a daily mix for me is because my kids are listening to their music on the Google Home Hub in my kitchen. And so the fact is that the behavioral data that they're collecting from all these different places are now being merged into my account, right? And it's creating a weirdness in my recommendation set. And the reason why this ends up happening is basically because I think they're built wrong, right? And what I would say about why they're built wrong in general is because they are about this single user context, right? And so the single user context comes from the history of computing, where at first mainframes were public devices that you would walk up and you would put your punch cards in and it would calculate something. And someone else couldn't use the machine at the same time as you because you'd be physically standing in front of it. It would be doing something in the background. Once we started creating this server client architecture, there was then time sharing. So you had to worry about like who's taking up resources in this centralized server, and then how do we understand who's actually doing this, and then how do we shut it down? How do we allow for time splitting and time sharing? And so this is where the single user context came up. Now, throughout the history of this, these things from research and academia then moved into the consumer world. So I have to log into a computer, right? The concepts of fast account switching started to come into multiple devices. And where it started getting weird again was when the Amazon Echo came into all of our homes as a general computing device, but was not actually looking at the communal nature of them and still attaching it to a single Amazon account. And so I think this is like the point where I think, again, things started getting weird and there started to be more problems. So the reason why this is a problem, right? When we take the Spotify example, this is basically an image that's trying to talk about the idea of collaborative filtering. And collaborative filtering is a technique that has been used for a long time to do recommendation services. But basically does is it looks at, say, me and John, right? And because we have an overlap of B, C, D songs, the opposite songs that we have not listened to will now be recommended to each other. And so this is called collaborative filtering. There's, of course, lots of other techniques that use more machine learning, non-deterministic type of things. But this is like a very classic calculation that almost every service uses some format of today to do recommendations. But the issue is because all of these songs, like B, C, D, in my case, may not actually be the songs that I listen to. And so this is a great slide from a presentation by Spotify talking about the way that they do their ranking and recommendation services. And so you can see here in the middle, there's an iPhone that is then logging user feedback, which includes interactions. So like, what am I liking? What am I adding to playlists? But also things that are just implicit feedback about songs, about how many times am I listening to something. And so if we were now replace this with the idea of the Google Home Hub, this idea of logging user feedback is no longer valid, right? Because it could be multiple people inside my household. It could be my kids, it could be my partner, it could be my mother-in-law, right? Those are all different people that are here on a regular basis that could play some type of music here. And when we start to now think about the, Spotify has tried to address these problems, right? And so they have something called a family premium plan that includes something called a family mix. And this family mix is actually the combination, it's more like the union or overlap of listening behavior and playlist behavior between everybody that's under this one account. And so you can see here that there's like people's avatars kind of to the right of each of these songs that shows the people that are actually listening to this. And it does combine it. It's the overlap between them rather than, I've actually been diving really deep more recently because I want to write a piece about this, but like group recommendation algorithms, there's a lot of interesting problems around kind of like, are you trying to optimize for overall happiness, like in a utilitarian way? Are you trying to be fair to everybody that's inside the household? There's a bunch of things that start to come up when we really look at this. Spotify has taken a very simple approach, which is the union or overlap. But it's not updated very frequently. It's capped at a certain number of songs. There's also some considerations that they've made around children. So being able to filter out explicit songs. And I've seen some hilarious like things that have shown up on shared playlists on like Reddit whenever people have these family playlists. But so they're trying to address it, right? Like, and so they know that this is some type of problem. I just don't think that they're necessarily taking all of the right steps. And so there's a bunch of things that we should talk about when it comes to this. And so, what problems arise when we talk about communal computing? And the first one that we've just talked about was identity, which is who's actually in front of the device, who's using it, what should we help with them with? The second thing is around privacy. How is it that information that I have is being now turned into something inside of a larger network? And am I meaning for it to be that way or not? The third thing is security. And so there's a lot of cases where, inside to get into a communal space, you usually have to pass through something like a locked front door, or in the office, like you have to key card into something. So there are some interesting kind of security implications already there. But the problem is that now when I'm actually in this somewhat more trusted zone of, say, my home, how much should my partner or my kids have to actually authenticate to prove that they are me or whatever, or they are themselves, and not show that they're me. And so I think there's some interesting security applications here. The fourth one is experience. So what should come up for me is probably very different than what should come up for my kids. And not only because of, say, consent and privacy issues, but also because I'm just a different person, right? If it's me, and then added to that, identity is not just about the idea of me as a singular person, but it could be me plus the entire family looking at something. And that is a very different context than just me individually. And so the experience should be able to adapt to that. And then finally, ownership, right? Once we start putting these devices into a shared space, there's a lot of problems that start to crop up when companies decide to change their terms of use or start charging a subscription. And so what happens to that data? So it's related to privacy and experience, but what happens to the data once things need to change? And so let me go take you through like some quick examples of each one of these. So identity, I like to use this graph. This was part of the article that I wrote with O'Reilly about kind of a description of the problems around identity, but there's a whole spectrum of people that end up going into people's homes or offices that range in the amount that I trust them versus don't, right? And so on the far right side, it's like me and my partner, and then it starts to go down to children, in-laws living with me, guests, say dinner party guests, service workers, cleaners, handymen, any of those types of people, to a landlord, and then finally the person that I probably trust the least is someone that's broken in. And so we need to consider all of these different identities and also the combination of these identities. So I have a bunch of different pseudo identities that are part of me. And so there's my family identity, there's my work identity, there's my school friends identity, there's the golfing identity, there's all these different identities that I have that make up me. And so these are things that we need to consider more when we talk about communal computing, because mismatching my identity, if you show my like pictures that are memories from Facebook of when I was like drunk at college at a dinner party with a bunch of guests that are family friends, probably not appropriate, right? So identity is really, really important in this case. Privacy keeps on coming up, and I've used contextual integrity as a framework, and I can definitely provide links for this, but it's a really great framework that talks about this idea that people don't want to just like hide their information and make it either private or not. What they actually want is they want to be able to control the flow of it. And so in this particular case, right, people that were using Flickr and then putting photos in a Creative Commons space did not really expect IBM to come along later and grab all those photos to then do facial recognition training. And so while it was data that they were putting out in public, it wasn't the endpoint that it went to was not the one that those people were expecting. And so there was a lot of concern about this. There was actually, I think, an FTC investigation into it. When it comes to security, the issue of people moving in and out of the household can cause lots of problems. So this is a really, really interesting article in the New York Times about how these different types of smart home devices can be used to basically harass and abuse people by the abusers that have left the home. And so they are the ones that potentially still have access to the Wi-Fi, the internet, the devices. And in this case, they've been changing locks, they've been turning up the thermostat, they've been doing things that are very harassing. But it actually takes a lot of work to disengage people from the communal space of the home in some way. And so I think this is like a very important security aspect to think about. The next one is experience. And so I like using this example of where both my son and I will yell at the Alexa or the Google Home Hub to actually play a particular thing. And so what ends up happening is that should Alexa's getting better at being able to understand multiple people and talk to them as a group, but should it actually in some way enforce a norm within the household, or should it be up to me to then enforce the norm? And so, I've done a lot of interesting like role play sessions around this about when two people are interrupting each other, is it in a way that's adversarial, say with my son and I, where we're trying to get it to play different things, versus the idea of like cooperatively, where say my wife and I are sitting down to decide what to watch, we would be talking to the device about like, well, what about with this actor? What about this genre? What about these things? Those are more cooperative cases. And so how much should we be actually policing this norm within the household is a really hard question. And then ownership, this is an example of where a Blink camera was I believe a Kickstarter project that then turned into basically a security camera system that Amazon then bought, but then essentially shut out everybody from using it in the way that they wanted to, which was in a more open way. And so ownership of these devices, because of the way that services work, it's not quite as clear as it used to be. So anyways, those are all the problems. So how do we move forward with this, right? Like I think, what are the models that we need to use? What are the ways we need to think about this to be able to actually build these systems in a way that are helpful or appropriate for a community space? And so one of those things I would say is really thinking from an ecosystem standpoint, right? For a very long time, and Dr. Sally Applin, who created a lot of things around polysocial reality, comes up with this idea of like design individualism, which is that everybody she uses the term Silicon Valley. She lives in Silicon Valley, but in a very derogatory way, which I get. Like everybody that lives in this world thinks about the idea of like, I'm interacting with a computer, so I only have to worry about that one person. When the reality is there's like a whole graph of people, services, devices that are all going to be interacting with each other in some way. And so I think an ecosystem approach is much more valid in a way to understand this. And so I've drawn, this is an example ecosystem where, I'm still putting myself at the center, but there's a bunch of devices that are around me, like the Echo, the TV, a digital picture frame. But I'm connected to other people that are here, like my mom or a child. And there's things like the digital picture frame are actually intermediating my mom and I through this Google Photo service to her digital picture frame. And so if we don't think about that pathway, we may make the wrong decisions about what photos should be shared in those particular cases. So what I would say is that, and the actual graph of things that are out there are getting bigger and bigger. This was a slide from Google I/O's What's New in the Smart Home that was earlier this year. And I was like, wow, there's actually connected mops within this world now. And I don't know what to say about that. I don't know what a connected mop is going to do for you. But there's a lot of things that are actually connected in this world that may have internet services, may have interactions that could interact with other devices inside the home. And we need to start to consider them because there's going to be weird interactions that happen between these different devices that we may not expect at first. So some of the do's for communal computing, I'll go through these really quickly, but if you want to read the article, I go into depth about each one of them. But doing research, really understanding the ergonomics of where these devices are placed is really, really important. Do build for everybody who would have access. So don't just assume that the person who's setting up the device is the only one who's going to use it. Do consider pseudo identities for individuals and groups. So like, what does my family identity mean in comparison to my work identity? How do we understand the switching between those things? When is that appropriate? And then do evolve with the space, right? Like people will unplug these devices and move them to somewhere else. And that is a great signal to say that something has changed about the way they want to use this device. And so as like, for example, when we first put these bookcases in that are behind me, we had very different things than are in it today. And so things evolve over time, people change over time. And so you should try to be aware of that and detect it as much as possible. And then finally, do use behavioral data, but do it carefully. And if you can't do it in a way that actually makes sense, like the Spotify case, you may not want to use that behavioral data at all. So like, is there actually a value of changing my recommendation stream based on the Google Home Hub data if it's never me that listens to it on that device? As far as don'ts, I would say that, first of all, don't assume that automation works in all contexts. So even though like you'll get an 80 or 90% confidence in particular things, it still may not be appropriate for that case. And this is where you should be looking for anomalies or some type of exception behavior. You should not include all of your services functionality in a device. So a classic version of this would be, Google has lots and lots of services. Should you try to jam every single one of those services into a Google Home Hub? And I would argue you should not. Probably most of the things that people want to do on those things are listening to music, maybe checking the calendar, and maybe doing video calling. But there's lots of things like my personal email. Should my personal email show up on a communal device? Probably not. Don't assume that your devices will be the only one. And this gets back to the ecosystem approach, that there's going to be lots of different things that are out there. Don't just assume that yours is the only one or that your brand is the only one, even though in some cases Amazon is trying to make sure that's the case. And then finally, do not change the terms without an out for the users. So if you are going to change the terms of service, you should just not brick devices, right? Sonos tried this as well. I think it's like a bad way to go about wanting to be part of someone's most intimate space, which is their house. Oh, sorry. And the last one is actually a big anti-pattern I see is that you need to use a mobile phone that is logged into a particular account to use the device. And you get into this weird space where like, for those like plugs, we use them for things like our Christmas tree or outdoor lights or something like that. I seem to be the only one that can ever remember the zone that those lights are actually in. So someone has to ask me to turn on the lights. And so this idea of like, not having a manual switch, making it easy for everybody to onboard to be able to use these things, I think is really, really important. So I think like one of the things I just want to do a short stop on is, when I was back at philosophy, we created something called empathy mapping for the machine, which really comes from Cooper's empathy mapping, where we're trying to understand like, what is this person's context to the world? And I think this is important when we talk about like individuals, right? How is it that I interpret the world, interpret the devices that are around me in some way? And so empathy mapping for machine was really to get at like, for these AI machine learning projects where there's non-deterministic behavior, what are our expectations for the way that those people, for that thing, that object or that system, that model would think around assumptions, expectations, things like that. And it focuses on the interpretability and trust because there's this idea of like, what is it saying? What is it doing? And how do I then understand that as a human being? And at first, it was not about personifying the machine. And the reason why is like, I think there's way too much language out there about turning AI and machine learning into this like God or something that is like all seeing and all smart. It's not. It's like a bunch of math right now. That is good in certain circumstances. And so this is where like empathy mapping for the machine was like a really interesting exercise to go after that. And so then I discovered something from a particular professor in basically in, so let me talk about this for a second. Animistic design. This actually comes from a bunch of like old religious contexts, like when we talk about spiritualism for maybe 100,000 years of humanity, it's this idea that both animals and even inanimate objects like rocks, this is an example of one of the most famous Zen shrines in Japan, have some type of spirit that is part of them. And for basically, there's a lot of other like kind of totems and symbolism that comes with animism as like a religious or spiritual study. But I think what's really interesting is when you start to think about it from the standpoint that we've wanted to personify things for a very long time. That's why we see faces in everything that we look at, is because we're always trying to find other people to connect with. And the same thing for us to be able to understand how natural phenomena works, we end up thinking about it as a way of like, how would this actually be a human being? And so even things like Greek gods or animal spirits in Native American spirituality assigns these personalities to things in a way that you can understand them. So like the idea of a fox as a trickster is a really interesting one because they're stealing food or they're sneaking around or something like that, right? And so it helps you understand the behavior in a way that is also now mapped to a human understanding in the way that we're really good at understanding other humans. And so I wanted to reference the last talk that was done here at AI and Design. And I thought it was really great that she referenced this idea of like animism, the idea of ecosystems approaches. And so I just wanted to make sure it was very clear, like, I think it's awesome that she brought this up. I think it's really, really interesting and amazing to talk about when it comes to the AI kind of context. And so, where I first came across this idea of animism was through this work by Jason Wong, who was an Art Center College of Design student. And he created something called the Committee of Infrastructure, which there's a bunch of videos, and I'll provide you a link to this later. But it talked about this idea of like a municipal hearing around some type of freeway change or intersection change, but from models that maybe would not necessarily get the say that they would usually. So in this case, it's not only the idea of like the council members, but it's the idea of the Department of Transportation. And they have a bunch of information about intersections that they're collecting all the time that can create models, predictive models. But we're also now including this idea of like street smarts and the people for the ethical treatment of animals in a way that animals are impacted by these intersections in some way. And so all of these different groups, there are different like kind of models that are making arguments for different cases based on what they're trying to represent. And so I think this was like the first step into animism. And where that really, I think led me to was this work by Philip Van Allen, who is a professor at Art Center right now, but is going to be moving on to, I think he's doing something else after this, around animistic design. And he wrote this paper in digital creativity that was really, really interesting to me. And so the quote here is really, rather than having people work with a single authoritative system, right? Like this all-encompassing system that is the big blue glowing brain that symbolizes AI that we're going to interact with, and everybody's going to have their own conversation with this big brain. We'd rather engage with these like smart systems where each entity has its own intentions, expertise, moods, goals, data sources, and methods, right? So each individual thing actually has some type of kind of way for us to interact with it. And the actual activity that they ended up using for this was for a person doing creative work, having multiple devices on their kind of desk, helping them do creative work. And so the idea of like the nostalgic would bring up photos from 10 years ago, the nerd would bring up facts. All these things had different personalities that you could start to understand, but would help you in some way as you were building something. And so, I guess the question is, right, sorry. You know what, I think my thing is going weird right now. So, I guess the question is like, do we put a face on everything? Do we make everything as human as possible? And I'd say no, right? And I think Phil would also agree that, we found using design cues more native to the device's function and personality better communicated a useful backstory and sense of intention. So I'm going to use the term lamp in the device of a lamp. I do not necessarily expect that every lamp in my household should be able to talk to me. I do not expect every lamp to have a face on it. I do not expect it to have eyes, right? These are all things that make a lamp a lamp. And so when we talk about animistic design, it's not about personification or, turning these things into like little animated, kind of examples of those things, but to actually leave them the way that they are, but now allow them to do something that is more like what they would actually do if they were in some way smart and things like that. So now we're going to get to the workshop, and I just want to talk very briefly about how we're going to go about this. So what I'd love to hear is, let's do a quick icebreaker. If you had to choose to be an IoT or smart home device, what would you be? And so for this, I'm going to, since I'd love for everybody to participate in the workshop, I'm just going to call on people. And so, you know, like, I guess let's start here. Let me pull up a list of people. So Kwan, why don't you start if you don't mind? What would be a device that you would be if you were in a smart home?
Oh, I'd like to be the smart fridge.
A smart fridge. Okay. Why is that?
And I get to see like what's all the food in the fridge. That's the most
Great.
amazing thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Great. Ben.
Maybe washing machine, because it's quite useful.
Very good. You want to be useful in the home. I totally get it. Let's see. Bashra, if you don't mind coming off mute, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, hi. I was thinking about my answer, and I think anything related to creating the shopping list, I don't have a word for it, but I don't know, a device that can make a shopping list.
Great. And why is that?
Because it is really hard to track all of the things that we want, and based on the recipes that we want to try on during the week and all the grocery shopping, I think that would be a very smart thing to have at every home.
Great. That's really great. Hazel, if you don't mind coming off mute, I'd love to hear your answer.
Yeah, so I think I would just mash up Kwan and Bushra's idea and create a smart fridge which would create a shopping list for me. Because I think, yeah, shopping list is a tricky bit, and if it can make judgment, make calls based on what's there in my fridge, what I'd want to cook, that would be great. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Laura, why don't you go? If not, that's okay too.
I'm not sure if you mean Lauren, but I'll go. Yeah. I think I would be, I want to be a smart speaker. I really just want to be playing music all the time and, adapting to the different moods. Yeah, that's what I would want to be. Although I am intrigued by Google's connected yogurt maker. So
I would love to hear how much more effective the yogurt making is with that Google device. So
I would also love to learn that.
Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, Laura Gris Mota, if you wanted to still come on, I'd be happy. I'd love to hear your answer. Oh, if not, okay. Well, it looks like she dropped off. Nadia, what's your answer?
The first thing that came to mind was these like automatic plant watering devices, like the ones that check like the moisture in the soil, and then if it feels a bit dry, they make sure to keep the plant alive. Yeah, I think I would have a fun time doing that.
Cool. Yeah, I think for me, I would want to be something like an irrigation system, because I love kind of sitting outside and, usually like I do my work early in the morning. That's when most of these times that happens. So yeah, anyways, that's what would be mine. So thank you everybody for answering that. What we're going to do now is I'm going to talk to you a bit about this mapping. So I'm calling it like animistic kind of mapping or animistic design mapping. And I'll give you just like a really quick overview of the things that I think we really should be focusing on when we do this. So one is really around interaction capability. So, I want you to embody and imagine you are a device and what that device actually could do that would make sense. And so again, as a lamp, probably not a lot of stuff you can do, right? And so from that perspective, we should be thinking about like, what are all the different senses that you can interact with as far as a human being? The next thing are traits. So I want to start to push people to think about, whenever we do copywriting for websites or applications today, we talk about like, what is our like the way that we want to be perceived by people as they read this copy. And so I want to extend that to these objects, like how should this object be in some way interpreted as far as the traits of it. The next thing are moods. Is over time, things will change for this device. Interactions will take place for the device. And things like, rather than the idea of like successfully used error cases, all these different things that we talk about when it's like really from a service design standpoint, I want us to talk about like what would these different moods mean for this particular device. There's going to be a discussion about location in the environment itself. Like how does your positioning in the environment of say a house or an office, how does that change things? And then finally, how does your relationship change not only with people, so like the person that maybe bought the device and brought it into the home and set it up, but also other people that are in the home and other devices that are in the home in some way. So I would like everybody to please, yep, here we go. Something going weird. Okay, we will also put this in the chat for everybody to go to the Miro. And so let me get that for everybody. And you should be able to access, if you have any problems, just feel free to shout at me about that. And actually, I'm going to stop sharing and we'll do the rest of this work in the Miro. So when you're in there, please join and then we'll start the workshop.
I will share the Miro screen here as well for the recording.
Oh, okay. Yeah, please do. Thank you very much. And yeah, so once everybody's in there, the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to want everybody to come over to the first section, which is right at the here. Let me put this up, and I'll pull everybody over to me right now. I would like everybody to look at these different devices, and I put a comment there just in case the device is not clear about what it is. I would love for everybody to choose a device that they would like to represent in this workshop today. And so I think there's definitely more than enough devices for everybody here. If you really, really want to do a device that someone else picks, I'm happy to duplicate it as well. But let's try to do a bunch of different things. So if people could grab a device and then just kind of, what you'll see is on the right-hand side, there's a bunch of personal boards as well. And if you want to go ahead and drag your device over to a board on the right-hand side, we'll do that first. Great. And by the way, you don't have to put your name down here. We're actually going to name this device in just a moment. But I would love for everybody to choose one of those devices and then drag it over to the right-hand side. So I'll give you a minute to do that. I'm going to pick one as well. I think after. All right, has everybody chose one? Let me see here. I'm going to take this one. All right. Oh yeah, and it looks like, okay. All right, so if everybody has a device now, what I would love for you to do is I want you to come up with a name that would be appropriate for this device. So yes, you can use human names. I feel like it's like human names for dogs. It still feels weird to me. I'm not going to call your dog by Mr. or Miss something. So come up with a name that would be appropriate for this device. Something that maybe is like personifies in some way the device name. So I'll give everybody a few moments to think about that and do that. Yeah, and so you should be able to just double tap where it says blank and just enter the name that you want to enter. Great. Please go ahead and do that. I'll give everybody a minute. All right. I think the picture frame doesn't have one. If whoever, yeah, there you go. All right, great. Looks like everybody has a name. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do, and we're all going to talk about our devices in just a moment, but what I want us to do is I want us to build a profile, and then I want everybody to introduce their device to the rest of us. But let's go after some traits now. So if everybody can come back over to where I am, and I'll pull everybody over here. What we're going to do is I would like you to look at all these different traits. And so these are traits that are of people that would, kind of be the spectrum of both like good and bad things. And I want you to also choose maybe some bad things about the device or traits that are potentially considered negative for them. But I want you to go through these and look through them. And there's actually stacks of them, so you should be able to pull multiple ones off. But I'd love for you to basically take 3 traits that you think most exemplify your particular device. And the way that you would expect this device actually to work in some way. So what I'm going to do is I'll give everybody, let's say, I'll give you 3 minutes to start. And then if we need more time, we can have more time. But I'd like everybody to think about this, look at it, end up pulling over 3 traits over to your card around that device. So 3 minutes right now. And I'll turn on the Miro timer. All right, so now that you've decided these traits, what I would love for you to do is I want you to look at the 6 little cards that are down below that. And these are different moods that the device could be in. And what I want to understand is like, there's 2 sides to this. One, what would put them in this mood, right? Like, and by the way, you're allowed to put as many sticky notes here as you want. And I'll create a bunch of sticky note packs for everybody here. But what I want is you to put down like what would put them in this mood. So, for example, like what would make it happy? What would make it sad? What would make it in some way like disgusted, afraid, surprised, angry? I'd love to hear what types of things would actually make this device feel that way. And then I also want to understand when it's in that mode, what types of things would it feel or do? What would if it could talk, what would it say? What types of actions would it take when it was in that type of mood? So I want you to just I put a bunch of sticky notes all throughout, kind of like to the left, the right, and the center. If you can also just create your own, but I would love for you to create a couple different ideas for each one of these topics. And so I'm going to give everybody 5 minutes right now to do this silently. And so go ahead and take about 5 minutes to come up with this. If we need more time, also, we can use more time, okay? Any questions before we get started, actually?
How should we visually differentiate the ones that put me in the mood and how I respond once I'm in the mood?
I think that it's okay if you just put text in there if you want. You're going to be reading off some of this stuff on your own. And so you can use different colors as well if you want. I'm pretty open to this. I don't have like a hard and fast rule around it. Okay? Yeah. Cool. Yeah, and feel free to size them however you want. You can do as many as you want, maybe 1 for each. I would just try to get to 1 for each. If you want to have multiple for certain ones that really make a lot of sense, I think that's great too. Okay, cool. 5 minutes starting now. All right, we're almost out of time. Okay, great. Thank you everybody for participating. Let's go ahead and for the next step, what I'd love for everybody to do is I'd love for you to take a moment to introduce your device. And so say your name. If you want to pull everybody to you as well, I think you should be able to do that. And then I would love for you to talk about the traits, maybe just like a little bit of explanation about why you chose those traits. And then I want you to take us through each one of the emotions and talk about those, okay? So why don't we, start, since whoever chose upper left-hand corner usually wants to go first. That's what I've decided. Why don't we do that first?
Sure. Let's start with that. Hi, my name is Otto. Otto, because it's round and it's the same from every direction, so you can it can go around and it's still the same. And I can be devoted, impatient, and overly enthusiastic, because it really wants to clean all the time. And yeah, impatient, it runs and runs, no matter if there's something in the way, and over enthusiastic because it keeps running and doing stupid things also. So so a little bit of both here. And yeah, when I'm happy, I light up and just do my job as it should be. When I'm sad, I'm most likely out of energy. I worked a lot and then I feel a little bit sad that I can't work anymore. So I go charging. I go to my home station. When I'm disgusted, I make a loud sound to make it clear that I'm disgusted, and yeah, maybe I should clean myself or anyone else should. And if I'm afraid, I just run in a different direction. I just run away, and that's it. And when I'm surprised, I just keep running. Maybe the solution for that is to just turn a little bit to the side. And when I'm angry, I just stop working. And yes, somebody should help.
That seems like a much nicer thing than like constantly ramming up against something over and over again. So that's awesome. Thank you so much for going first. That's really great. Cool. Well, let's go to the next person, next device, and let's talk about the one to the right of that, the floor lamp.
Yes. Yes, the floor lamp. My name is Gucci, a fabulous floor lamp, and I can be kind, generous, and warm. When I'm happy, I shine bright, and I like to help shine away for people. When I am sad, it's mostly because I'm on for too long, I'm overworked, I'm way too tired, and I glow an uncomfortable shade and sometimes flicker. When I am disgusted, the space is probably unclean and there's a sense of embarrassment. So I dim myself down or turn off just to hide all the mess. When I am afraid, I flicker or go blank, especially when there's water around my power source. When I'm surprised, I blink. Usually when someone unexpected shows up, could be a party, could be a warning sign. And when I am angry, most likely because I am knocked over, I make buzzing sounds.
That is really great. Thank you so much. That's awesome. All right, well, let's go to the next one on the right, and that's the echo, or basically the connected speaker.
I just saw in chat the connected speaker resonate is from Lauren, and she has to drop. Sure,
Okay. All right, well, no problem. Let's take a quick look at this. So, it sounds like I can be open-minded, loyal, and but I have some things around dominance. When I'm used to cheer, I'm happy when I'm used to cheer someone up. In my household, that would be through playing a lot of fart sounds for my kids. When I know the answer to a request, I'm also happy when I'm used to connect to a group, and when I'm confident in recommending a song. I'm sad when I'm not used that often, and that happens a lot. And when I don't recognize who's talking to me. That's interesting. And then disgusted when I'm in the kitchen and I get spattered on. So these devices have like a lot of kind of concern about their long-term hardware not being too dirty. So that's great. I'm afraid when I don't know the answer to a request or I'm unplugged. I'm surprised when a song that is requested is not aligned with the previous listening habits. And I'm angry when my songs are changed too rapidly, too often, and when people are rude to me. That's awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you to Lauren for doing that. That's awesome. All right, let's go to the next one. And that's the picture frame on the right-hand side.
Hi, I am Font, like your memories that I show all the time. I can be loyal, narcissistic, enthusiastic, and dominant. Yeah, I picked 4 because, you know, sorry. Loyal because, yeah, obvious, and narcissistic because obviously it's the main owner's pictures. So they're just going to be quite the protagonist or like main character here. But also loyal because I thought maybe it could like change which pictures it's showing depending on who's in the room. And dominant because it is just quite a dominant presence, I think, to have this kind of like interactive, ongoing slideshow picture frame there all the time. And maybe you're just having a conversation and it feels like it's kind of, I don't know, interrupting. When I'm happy, or what makes me happy, is when people comment on the pictures that I'm showing. And then I show more pictures that I think people will comment on. So it's like positive reinforcement for my algorithm. I get really sad if I'm being ignored. So then I show more dramatic or triggering pictures to demand attention. I also get sad if the pictures maybe make the main owners sad or cry. And I think that maybe it was my fault because I showed them a picture of their ex or something. So then I go back to happy, safe pictures, like the ones I know they like from vacation. Makes me really disgusted to see nudes or maybe also pictures of food because humans are disgusting. And so then what I do, I go through the same old pictures, so I don't have to look at the new ones and consume this disgusting content. What makes me afraid is if the people in the room are fighting or tense, or if there's some sort of argument, because I'm not sure what's the appropriate picture to show at that time that would not be distracting or triggering. So then I showed generic landscape pictures. And what surprises me is if the main owner asks for specific things for like that I thought that I had labeled triggering. So maybe an ex or like someone who's deceased or whatever. But of course I do as they ask. And then what makes me really angry is if they toss me into a drawer, or yeah, if they take out the plug and basically stop using me, I take that real personal. Or if they never upload or add any new pictures. So like they only upload to me one time and then I don't get like new material to work with, then I get angry and bored. So that's me, your picture frame.
That's great. Thank you so much. All right, let's go down to the second row on the left and the coffee maker. To the left, yeah, the coffee maker. Whose was this?
I'm not sure whose this is, but they might have.
They might have stopped part of the way through.
Well.
Okay, well, I'll talk through it. So hi, I'm a coffee maker. My name is Brian, and I'm decisive, loyal, and bold. I enjoy bold coffee, so I appreciate that. When I'm happy, I have good coffee beans. And when I'm sad is when I'm not being maintained, and then disgusted, I'm not cleaned. And I could imagine that I'd be afraid if I'm not being used or I make the wrong type of coffee. I'd say I'm surprised when when someone makes coffee and never drinks it, or vice versa, someone doesn't make coffee that morning. And then finally, I'd probably be angry when someone puts something in a bad into the coffee grinder or anything like that. I don't know. Does anybody else have any other ideas? I'd love to hear if there's other people thinking about this.
Or maybe when they forget to turn something off, or yeah.
Maybe,
so if it burns the coffee, basically, like it sits in there all day. Yeah.
Maybe Brian also gets sad if you add milk to your coffee because he's like, I worked so hard at this, and you're just like, watering it down. Like you don't appreciate me.
Italian
Has an,
coffee machine.
Yeah.
yeah, it has an opinion about the coffee, basically.
Yeah, or
That's great.
maybe if you put cheap beans, it's also like, ugh, this is what I have to work with.
It might also be sad then.
Yeah. Sad or attitude, depending on, its personality.
Yeah,
Both.
exactly.
So I think petty then.
Exactly. Well, that's great. Well, thank you, whoever did that and had to leave probably. If we go to the one to the right, that's mine actually. So I'm the connected doorbell, and I called it Sauron, as in like the Eye of Sauron from Lord of the Rings. And I put down loyalty just because I'm loyal to the people that live there and not really anybody else. Persistence, because I constantly have to be watching the scene that is out in front of me. And then rude, because there's going to be times where people come by that I do not want to be there or shouldn't be there. And so I think when I'm happy, and I did a couple different things, I'll just run through them really quickly, but if I'm happy, I've seen people that live here and I know, and they come in, I probably just love like beautiful scenery in the background, like seeing the breeze and the trees outside. I love seeing that someone lives here, has picked up a package after that package has been dropped off. So that's like a good thing. And then I'm also really happy whenever I let someone in, even though they may not live here, but someone that lives here said to let them in, basically. I get sad when I lose power or network connectivity because I can't tell people that someone is here. Even if I have battery, I can't tell them. So I get upset about that. I get disgusted whenever I see bad behavior outside of the door. And that could be like just someone doing something bad to our outdoor area. Or if I see like a trash can get overturned outside, those are all things that make me disgusted. As far as afraid, someone is trying to break into the front door, or someone is angry that I won't let them in, that I know for whatever reason, I get really afraid at that point. I get surprised if I don't see someone walk up, but suddenly just like appear there, that really scares me. If someone walks out that I didn't see walk in that way, it definitely surprises me because I didn't expect them to. And then if someone I don't know is able to enter the door lock without someone else telling them to, so they know the code, but I didn't know them or know that they were given the code. And then finally, it makes me angry whenever like solicitors come by, if I don't want to talk to them, or the people in the house don't. And then whenever someone takes this that I do not know, that doesn't live in the house, they take a package that was dropped off. That really, really makes me angry. So that's the doorbell. Great, so let's go to the next one. What's the, it's the ceiling lamp.
That's me. So hi, my name is Lux. The traits that I attribute to myself is being cooperative, where I shine as bright as I can and do all the work that I'm asked to. I'm fair because I shed the same amount of light across all areas. And most cultures consider light to be a part of spirituality. So I added spirituality as a trait to myself. And then when I'm happy, I shine as best needed to. So probably based on the settings that the user wants me to be on, I shine as best as I can. And I'm happy when I'm operated responsibly, I'm sorry, when I'm turned off and on correctly. And I'm sad when I'm not operated responsibly, and so I just flicker out. Similar things happen when I'm disgusted and afraid as well. So when I'm disgusted, I just turn myself off and sit there, and that happens when kids tend to play with switches and probably scream into the smart device that controls me or things like that. And when I'm afraid, that happens when I'm left alone shining in an empty room. So probably somebody forgets to switch me off. I dim myself out. When I'm surprised, that happens when somebody remembers to turn me off or turn me on, responding to prompt actions. I do that. And then I do have a party setting on me. So when that gets turned on, I'm surprised when I shine all shades like a disco ball. When I'm angry, I just blow the fuse out. And that would be Lux.
That's really great. Thank you so much. Well, thank you, everybody. You all did an amazing job. You're all very compelling and authentic devices. And so what we're going to do now is I'm going to bring everybody over to this this floor map. And so I want you to grab, I took a copy of your photo, and I want you to place it somewhere inside of this this house where it would be appropriate. Oh, and I think the coffee maker is no longer here, and the echo is not here anymore. Oh, great. Thank you for duplicating. That's great. Yeah, if you need to duplicate, feel free. If you feel like you should be in multiple places. All right. So what I'd love to ask now is I want to let's explore a little bit about the way these different devices would work with each other. And so we'll just use a couple examples here. So what I'd love to hear is how do both Lux and Gucci, how would you interact with each other? Whoever can go first.
I guess I would probably turn myself off and on according to Gucci. So probably when Gucci is on, I needn't operate. But that again depends.
Yeah, that's great.
I think there's two options here. One is that we coordinate the same light so that it doesn't clash. Or two, like when one is on and the other is off, or vice versa, depending on the mood.
Yeah, that's great. So I would love to hear how Otto, if we brought Otto into the mix now, how would Otto work with Gucci and Lux?
Well, for one, I would say maybe if the light is on, I shouldn't or should be operating depending on the owner. So
Okay.
so maybe he likes if he control it, if the owner wants to control it, he should be there physically. So if the light is on, most likely is. But on the other hand, it's loud. So if somebody is around, it shouldn't be on probably. So
what does Lux and Gucci think about that?
I think Otto should hide when we're on. But maybe that's also my bias as an owner coming in.
Anything else, Lux? Do you have any opinions before we move on?
No, I think I agree with Kwan.
Okay, great. Well, so yeah, one thing I would love to ask is Fond, how would you think about either working with Sauron or with Resonate, which is the speaker?
Right, so font, Sauron is like the doorbell, right? So I think similarly to Otto, maybe if nobody's home, I should be off because I'm just wasting power basically, and just prepare my next sequence, and just not show anything. I should be on sleepy mode. Resonate was the speaker, right? Yeah, so maybe, I'm not sure where I would get this data from, but if I could figure out they're playing a certain playlist or music that they played, I can figure this out. If I have daytime tags, I can figure out if somebody was playing a specific song a lot in a specific time frame, on a holiday or just last year fall, and then show pictures from that time to sort of go into a full time capsule. And maybe I could also be prompted to show specific things. So it could be hey, Resonate, show pictures on the font of la la la. And also, if I don't have a mic, because I'm not sure why I would have a mic necessarily, I could latch onto the mic of the Resonate to identify the people in the room and then show pictures of the owner and them together. I think that's enough collaboration right there.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and as representing Sauron, I would actually want all, I would want Fond, Lux, and Gucci to all kind of active states whenever someone's at the door. whether either good or bad. And actually, it would be really great to be like have different colors depending on whether it's someone I know or not, or something like that, right? Like maybe there's
maybe also when Sauron is scared, like you think somebody's trying to break in, then there's this like Home Alone program that gives the illusion that someone is home.
Exactly. That's awesome. well, thank you, everybody. So we've now done the device to device, right? So we've talked about some interesting interactions that could take place there. The next thing that I would love to do is, let's say that we took, let's say that the child, oh, hold on, let me, so let's say that a child was playing in the living room. What do all the devices in the living room have to say about that? They're playing on the floor with like Legos or blocks or something like that.
I, as Otto, probably shouldn't be cleaning while the kids are playing. But it should be very active when the kids are not playing, because it's really needed.
Yeah. Yeah, my daughter, who's like a year and a half old, is very afraid of the Roomba right now. So yeah, I totally agree with that. What else?
So as Lux, I would just probably shine if it's if the kids playing in the evening or night hours, and if it's during the day, then it depends on how the ambience is. If it's dark outside, then I'd probably shine myself. Otherwise, I'd not shine so bright. I don't think I have much to do when it's just kids doing their activities there.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and as Gucci, I would say similarly to Lux, depending on what time of day and also what activities kids are playing. Like if they're playing with a lot of toys, it could be just like shining brighter just to make sure, there's no lost parts. But then if it's like closer to their bedtime, maybe like the lights start dimming a bit. So 'cause you don't want kids to be like active or too how you say that, like triggered by the light.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, and Fond, do you have anything else you'd want to add to that around a kid being in the living room?
I'm not sure. I don't think I have enough kids around to be inspired by this. What should I do if a kid is?
Well, they do love looking at photos, but there's also the issue: are you distracting them from the play, right? So I think there's like
I feel like maybe they get overstimulated if I'm doing pictures and they're doing stuff. I don't know.
Couldn't the picture frame be part of the game, for example?
Yeah,
that could be. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like even from, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's really far-fetched. Like if they're like, oh, what shall we build? Then maybe the resonate can be like, build what's on Fond. And I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I was thinking about Resonate too, that it should start pestering them if they have like something they need to do next. So like you need to get your shoes and socks on because you have to go to school in 20 minutes or something like that.
That would be really nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Well, I know that we're running low on time, so thank you so much for everybody for doing this workshop. It was really great. I'm just going to do a really quick closing, and then we can go to some Q&A. And so let me just 1 second. Let me share my screen. Oh, can you stop sharing, please?
Sure.
Thank you. Awesome. All right. So just in closing, I'd love to just hear, what were some things that you learned about these devices that were surprising? What would you want to learn more about? And then how might this change the way you built the device? I'd love to just hear from everybody that's still here. So maybe Kwan, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think it was quite interesting to see how connected you could make everything, and also just to think about devices as things with personalities. It was kind of funny because imagine like if as a user you could choose what kind of personality your device can have. Like that's kind of fun, but also kind of like scary in a way. Do you want it to have like one same personality the whole time? Could you change the personalities of your devices over time?
Yeah.
That's kind of like playful.
Yeah, it's like in Interstellar, if you ever watch that, he talks about like taking back the humorousness of the bot at a certain point because he's like making too many jokes, basically. So I think that's like really interesting. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, and in terms of what I'd like to learn more about is maybe how or not sure, it's more like a explorative question. If if you could connect your devices to the news and kind of scrape and identify popular culture, if that would help make because families are in a sense a bit of a microculture that reflects on the larger culture. So if that would help with communal computing as well.
Yeah. Cool. Great. All right. Well, thank you. Hazel, what do you think? What are you coming out of this with?
Yeah, I think so far probably I would have just focused on a single device and not thought of it much of as a communal item. So now that I've learned to link or probably learn to think about how to link these devices with other devices. For example, thinking about how a ceiling fixture would interact with a Roomba. That I think has brought in some perspective how networking between devices happen, and also the aspect of the devices not just responding to stimuli, but also the state in which they are, whether they're angry, sad. I think that was also interesting. So probably if I were to build something, these things would affect the way I create these devices in future.
That's great. Ben, what do you think?
After this workshop, I really think differently about how much devices could improve if they would communicate with each other more, and also with their environment. Never thought about that this way, and this deep way, which is really great. And something very in particular, I've learned that thinking about my own device, the Otto, I think there's a huge advantage of it being mobile to be able to move around freely and move around between different rooms, for example, which no other device can, which could be made more of. It's really
well, yeah, I mean, there are some devices that do that, right? Like your mobile phone and your laptop do.
Yeah. But
you're right.
For example, the phone can't move itself. You have to move the phone, but
yeah,
you can't do it.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Interesting.
Cool. Well, thank you. Nadia, what do you think?
Yeah, I also think like the role-playing part between the devices was really really interesting. And yeah, it's sort of within just minutes, you're like, there's so much that could be improved with like pretty minimal data that they are probably already collecting, but just, nobody's maybe thinking about them as these ecosystems, but just designing, one at a time. So I think there's a lot of potential there for user experience, but also there's such a like business incentive to doing that, because then you want to keep your whole ecosystem, it's like how are we not doing this yet?
Yeah, should those devices that are from the same group gang up on the other devices to bully them into doing something?
Yeah,
right? Like how does that work in some way? If most things are Amazon, but one thing is Google, what does that mean? Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's an interesting one as well, like just thinking about how these devices are actually in the home, and they're not necessarily all from one provider. So what kind of collaboration would that sort of require on like the company's end in order for these devices to actually like play nice together, basically? But yeah, I would love to see that. And I think also the emotions, it's like, it feels like, when you start doing it, it feels quite childlike. I mean, I love stuff like this, but where you're like playing the device and like being quite like overplaying it a little bit. At least I definitely overplayed my character, but I did get like new ideas about maybe features that it should have or shouldn't have, or like different things that might be almost like edge cases, but really important anyway to design for, in terms of like, what's happening in the space that they exist in. So yeah, really fun as well, like very insightful, but also very fun. I felt a little bit like we were doing like improv. So yeah, had a great time. Thank you.
No, absolutely. Well, thank you everybody for participating in this. And yeah, I think this is where I think when we talk about the future of a lot of this stuff, like what is actually an edge case anymore, right? Because the idea of edge cases within these types of environments cause a lot of problems. You know, even when we talk about like in say social media, even though you cover like the 99% case around say safety and security and identity, for those 1% of cases, you end up creating a lot of havoc in those people's lives, right? And so even at Facebook, we didn't call it edge cases. It was like special case, right? Rather than edge. And so I think there's something really interesting about like, how do we start to adjust this terminology too? Because it really is meaningful, right? Like these things that these cases we're talking about are the way that people live. And so if you don't actually meet that in some way, they will just unplug you and put you away, right? Like that's what will happen essentially. And that was like I think it was both anger and surprise and fear for all different people, devices in this particular case. So totally agree. So yeah, I think like just my last call to action for everybody here is to always consider the ecosystem, because once you start to consider that, you consider the interactions, you can understand way more about the way these things will work. I'm also, when I share these slides, here's a bunch of communal computing stuff. So I've written 3 articles about this and then did a talk that for about the first half touches on this. This is going to be another, I think this is like the great one. So please, if you want to review this, this will be on YouTube. And then I also have a bunch of resources around Animism. So not only kind of the original articles that really brought me to Animism as a kind of design framework or thought process, as well as the last talk at around 34, 38 is when they mention basically Animism. So thank you, everybody. I'm happy to stick around for like a little while just to answer any questions, but feel free to contact me as well. Really, really happy everybody got a chance to try this out, and thank you again.
Thank you. It's really, really, really great.
Cool. Yeah, so I'm okay to stick around for a little bit. If there are any questions or thoughts in addition, love to talk, but happy to, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And just for those of you that are still here, like Chris mentioned, this is recorded, so it'll be on YouTube in a couple days, for accessible to everyone. And yeah, I guess if anyone has questions, feel free to throw it out. I do have 1 or 2. So
Yeah, cool.
I have to drop, guys, because I have to run to this dinner. But thank you so much, Chris, for doing this with us, and nice to see you all. And yeah, see you at the next one.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Hope I don't miss any really fun, interesting questions.
always rewatch it.
Yeah, true. Bye.
Great. Cool.
Bye. Yeah, I have a question on like, is there always a trade-off between personalization and kind of designing for these communal experiences? Or would you say there's a way around this trade-off? You'll be on mute, by the way, Chris.
Sorry. This is a classic trade-off when it comes to building software, right? Because you want to build something that's generalizable enough that it covers the majority case, that then people can, you'll get the most good, right? Or you know, whatever you end up using as your impact or outcome metric, but you're trying to help the most people with as little work as possible. And so I think this is where the special casing of things actually flies in the face of that, right? Like there are going to be lots of special cases that come up because people live highly contextual lives, right? And we're not just taking like an individual's life now, right? Which is hard enough to do recommendation services around, but now you're talking about like n number of people in the household and the way that all of their relationships and norms that are constantly being renegotiated, like non-verbally, right, as well, across all these people. So I don't think it makes anything simpler. What I would argue though, is that there is a real call here to say that we should be aware of worst case scenarios. So like, I think one of the projects I'm starting to think about a bit is I'm going to make a proposal to basically this like peer-to-peer computing platform called Urbit, that is about this idea of like, what would it mean if we built like a privacy first doorbell, oddly enough, and you included things like facial recognition. There's really good questions about what does opt-in mean as my face into this service. And so especially with like Facebook announcing the Ray-Ban kind of story glasses, things like Snap actually going to full AR glasses, Project Aria from Facebook. Those are all things that, you know, should it be that for you to opt out, you actually have to go and log into Facebook and say, I never want to be shown on this thing, Or should actually be the other way around. It should be that like, unless I've opted in explicitly to have my face as part of this, that you just blank me out of all the video, right? Because we have the capability of doing like facial recognition, face matching, like all these things that like, it's almost like that Black Mirror episode where the guy can't see anybody else anymore, or like where they can't interact, right? I think it was the Christmas special. But like, that to me is almost the way that we should approach privacy from the beginning, potentially, right? And so that's something I think about a lot, is like, that is kind of a special case. But if we take it from that standpoint, being additive when people want to add more to the way that they do things. Like, I want my face to be recognized by my doorbell because I want it to be able to like tell the door lock to let me in automatically. That's a very important scenario for me. I think this gets into a really weird space though, because not everybody is able to do these things with their smart homes today. And so what that means to me is that we almost need to have this idea of like the handyman to be like more aligned with the network, like all of the IT stuff for the household. And so, you know, like when I first had I have a Nest Home Hello doorbell at my front door, but I live in a house that's like over 100 years old. And so we could not find like what happened. Like basically when they tested the power at the doorbell, which is where they usually like attach it, there was like no power, and it was very little at least. So it clearly something was damaged, but when we tried to trace the line, we just couldn't find it, right? And so like that is one of those circumstances where I knew I would not be able to figure it out because I just didn't know the house. I was not an expert in these type of wiring things. So I hired someone for $99. Part of when you buy a Nest Hello, you can pay a $99 package to have them come in and wire up this device, basically. The person that came couldn't solve the problem. They ended up having to like drill through the wall to do a plug into a socket that was down below on the other side of the wall. So it's still not like the ideal circumstance, but it was way better than what I would have gotten to just by myself, right? And so now you apply this to things like privacy rules, automation, all these things that are really hard to start to understand. You may want to just have that person that maybe if you don't feel comfortable like hanging up a really heavy picture, you hire someone to come in and do it. Maybe you do the same thing for this idea of like privacy. And like going back to that whole thing around abuse and harassment in the home, there are actually people that are Twitter threads that I've seen where people volunteer to go in and help people that are like kicking out abusive spouses to reset all of their digital devices in the home. And it takes like hours to do because you're like resetting the Wi-Fi, you're wiping all these individual devices and setting them up with brand new accounts, right? Which is another problem, is that like the person that got kicked out may have owned the account for that device, right? And so anyways, there's like lots of really interesting things to go through. We're way early at all of this. I want to open people's eyes to the idea that there's a lot of things we need to consider now that we're getting into this realm of like very intimate computing, right? That is different than just my mobile phone and how it interacts with me. It's all of the people inside my house that it interacts with.
Yeah, definitely. And also like when you mentioned privacy and consent, like it's beyond
Yes.
like terms and privacies that you see online now. Like, if I have smart home, should I put up a sign that says, oh, once you come into this house, you're recorded or your movements are noticed. So yeah, definitely.
It's like a book, which is like this thick of just like terms of service at your front door. And it's like, please flip through this before you come inside. Oh, you don't want to look through it? That's fine. You just agree that just go inside, right? Like that is probably not an acceptable way. And I think this is where regulation comes in, privacy regulation, which, you know, GDPR, but also in the US, there's now kind of state by state level consent laws for like, you know, and I'm more familiar with the US, but it's like the idea of like children consent laws when it comes to digital technologies, like 13 for the US through COPA, but then the CCA, which is the California one, sets it at 16. And then the GDPR says, I believe 16, but each individual like member state or country can actually decide whether they make it longer, like 18 or higher. And so it gets really confusing, right? And so there's just like all this stuff that's going to start interacting in ways that we just don't expect. And honestly, I also like it now bridges over multiple, like a lot of people, like I have digital picture frames that I bought from like Nick's Play, where I have one here, and then I gave one to my mom who lives in Washington State. And so I actually control the picture streams that are on both of them through the same account. But it meant that I had to like log myself into her picture frame. and that's really odd, right? Like it's her picture frame now. She should be able to add additional photos, but she should also be able to get my photo stream, right? And so anyways, there's so much to do here when it comes to privacy and security and identity work that we're really just trying to scratch the surface. And that's I think the tough part about this. Yeah. What other types of questions?
Are you planning to do some more work on this?
Yes. So I think I'm lining up a couple like talks around this that are more focused. Like the next talk I'm going to do is probably with the New York Bots and AI meetup group. And that one's going to be very specific about like how, if you are not able to, like if Amazon doesn't do the right job with their Echo and Alexa to actually understand multiple profiles and identities, what do you do as a skill to make sure you're not making mistakes? So that's very tactical, right? And so that's going to be like another kind of topic about this. I think that the topics I want to write about next is one, again, doing like a piece about that idea of like very tactical, you're an Alexa skill creator, what do you do? But I think also this whole concept around like handyman, I keep on using handyman, by the way. I've researched it. There's no gender neutral version of handyman that exists out there. Handy person is not considered to be a colloquial term at this point. So I just use handyman because that's what Wikipedia says right now, but maybe handy person, I'll just use that from now on. But like this idea of the handy person and how they interact with your home and how you hire them and have them help you, I think is a really, really interesting problem. And so I'm starting to pull together some information around that. And then I also want to talk about like, I think a key thing here is a lot about this idea of recommendation services for groups. And so, like I said, there's a bunch of papers that I started reading that I saw from like 2000 to 2011, but there's not like a lot of stuff there. Like they end up talking about like, how do you decide what things you're trading off, which I think is the right discussion. Like, are you trading off like a majority of the family's okay, but one person really hates the music? Like, is that okay? Or how do people take turns? Like, there's a lot of things around norms. That's, again, I keep on saying norms, but I think that's really what we're talking about here is like, how we all have kind of like unsaid things in the way that we interact with each other. And so how do you now take that into account when you're doing things like recommendation services? I think is like another thing to think about. But I'm always open. Like if there are people that want to run this workshop, by the way, I'm happy to sign an NDA and help you run this workshop if you need that. But I probably plan on doing like another workshop like this as well. I just want to test out the format a bit more and see how that works. And then, yeah, that's all I have planned right now, but those are kind of the next steps.
Sounds really great.
Yeah, good.
Well, anything you've learned from today? Lost us, but
so I loved seeing, I mean, this is one of those things that I think for everybody that does like facilitation, there are a lot of things I saw that I want to improve in like the way I facilitated the workshop that probably most people didn't notice, but those are like little things that I'm going to now set up to make it easier for people, to make it more clear, things like that. I like things being unclear a little bit, especially when we're in this ideation phase. So I always try to balance those things. So I think there's like some tuning that I want to do to the workshop. I think I really love the personification or the animism that was actually included here. So I think it's going to be good to actually talk about examples. And so I think actually maybe another thing I want to write is just like an explanation of this workshop so other people could do it. So publishing the Miro board, publishing like instructions, things like that. I think that's what to me is most interesting about today, is just hearing all of your thoughts about this. Because like definitely parts of it were surprising to me. And that is what I love, is like being surprised by these types of workshops, because that means that I haven't like exhausted my understanding of all this. And that's really, really special to me. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that's great. Also thought about a lot about, yeah, might be even more important in the future if there is more augmented reality. If
Yes.
there are maybe devices that are entirely virtual,
yeah,
and have to interact with you and with other devices too.
Totally. I think all that stuff around the metaverse, around VR, around AR, and the way that devices and people end up interacting with each other, I think there's definitely something there. I'm just not quite sure yet. Like I think that was why like alt space VR was so interesting to me when it first came out, and I've like spent some time in there. I've been to Burning Man twice in alt space, even though I've been like 6 other times physically. Like seeing how that stuff interacts is really interesting to me, because it's like, what are the norms that are appropriate for a virtual space? Because your viewpoint is changed slightly, right? Like you have slightly different capabilities around interaction. And in the case of like Allspace, there's some people that are actually on a computer. They're not even in a VR rig. So like, what does that mean? And so that gets really, really interesting to me to think about is like and there was a NYVR was a group that I was part of when I was living in New York, and they had someone from Allspace talk there. And that was the most interesting thing to me is I would love to look at kind of the behavioral data around the way people distance each other from each other. Right? Like, how do I join this conversation where maybe my audio is carrying, but I don't want to be like right in the middle of the conversation? How do I lead conversations? How do I join conversations? That to me is like at the core of the most interesting thing we could be doing with VR right now. Because like when people want to join a conversation, like, should I just pop into existence or should it look like I'm walking up? Right? Because we have very different physical affordances when it comes to like being at a party. And the same thing with like Kumo Space. I don't know if anybody's used Kumo Space before. I think they've done a meetup through AIxDesign with Kumo Space or some type of spatial one. But Kumo Space is one that I've actually planned like a birthday party event during COVID around, where you can only hear things in a certain earshot and you're walking around or you're moving around with the keys, but then it's just your video of your face and you are like interacting with each other. And so I think that's like another example of where this kind of almost virtual kind of space, so adding the physicality of spatialness of these things. So I think there's probably an article in me sometime in the next couple months around the metaverse and this stuff. I'm just not quite sure what the exact thing is yet around that. So if you do this stuff and you think about it, I'd love to hear more, because I definitely, I mean, I have like a Quest and I do a lot of stuff like that where it's just like, it's just interesting to understand like how people interact with each other around that. So yeah. Totally agree with you though. Cool. All right. Well, thank you everybody. It was really great hearing all of the thoughts from you. It was really awesome. Everybody did a great job. Thank you so much. And yeah, so I guess we'll close now.